yet again, we're talking about Andy Burnham today. But we should, I think, give our readers and our listeners some context about Andrew Gwynne and why there's so much speculation about his retirement. So you've stood up some reporting that he's reached an agreement on medical grounds with the House of Commons to allow him to draw his pension early, retiring early as an MP on medical grounds. I've WhatsApped him. I haven't had a reply, so I can't really speak for what he's going through at the moment, but he's been off sick from Parliament. And I interviewed him a while back about his long COVID symptoms. And I remember ringing him once and he was just really breathless on the phone after just walking across Vauxhall Bridge from his South London flat, south of the river, over to his office in Westminster. So he's really been suffering those symptoms for a while. I don't know whether that's the context for exactly what he's decided now. But in the meantime, he was sacked as a health minister last year and lost the Labour whip because of offensive messages that he'd sent in a WhatsApp group about constituents. And so here is a Labour MP, lost the whip as a Labour MP, suffering from poor health as well. So kind of a natural person in Greater Manchester to stand aside for Andy Burnham to then run in a by-election in his seat.
And we should say, before we get into it, that by the time people listen to this, Andrew Gwynne might have resigned as an MP.
Yes, that's true. Things are, moving quite quickly.
Things are moving, but as you say, the only bit that we know for certain is that privately he's reached, as you say, a kind of quite prosaic agreement around his pension plan with the House of Commons authorities. That bit is confirmed. It was The Guardian and The Times that reported it first. Most people are taking that as a sign, and also from their sources, that he's poised to resign. But as you say, he's not responding to messages.
Yeah.
And, friends of his have been saying it's his decision, and until he actually does it, it hasn't happened. It's, the Westminster thing of the line is the line until it's no longer the line. He's still the MP. There's still no by-election until he actually does it. And as we're recording, we're at risk of looking like hostages to fortune. But this could happen
as ever.
As ever. But, this could happen in 2 minutes, or it could happen in 2 weeks, or it could happen never. And then the whole rest of our conversation is kind of hypothetical. But as it stands, everyone's waiting for Andrew Gwynne, and everyone's getting very excited about what this could mean about Andy Burnham.
Yeah, and why is the timing so important? Explain it to us, Ailbhe, because I think you've said on a previous podcast when we've been talking about Labour leadership candidates, basically the time where we assume a Labour leadership election might kick off is around the May elections. And Andy Burnham would need to be in Parliament to be a candidate in a leadership election. And so he basically he doesn't have that much time before May to get a seat. And so that's why the timing's quite important in terms of people wanting to hear whether or not Andrew Gwynne has made up his mind about this.
Yeah, exactly. Because, I'm going to show my ignorance by not knowing the exact timings around this, but there's a whole thing around when you resign as an MP, you get given a title, the Baron of something, sure.
Of course.
I can't remember what it is, but it's really good. And then it's sort of up to the Commons authorities or the relevant party to move the writ that basically do the mechanics inside Parliament to trigger the by-election and to set the date, which is a certain number of weeks after that point.
Yeah.
And so it's not just, Andy Burnham could, as long as there's a by-election soon, he can get into Parliament in time. There's a lead-up time, and really, I think that the assumption, I was speaking about this with someone earlier, on the exact timings, because Reform could pull some shenanigans and try to have a by-election sooner or something if a by-election needed to happen.
Yeah.
Although someone was saying to me they just don't understand how the House of Commons works well enough to really pull that off, maybe.
Right.
But yeah, basically, he needs a by-election to be triggered in time for the actual election, and that by-election to be on the same day as the local elections, if not before.
Yes, I see. Yeah, okay. And Gwynne has denied that there's this pact going on, and he said the route to number 10 is not going to be through Gorton and Denton. And as we've said, he's not replying to our messages. What's Burnham been saying? Have you spoken to his team about this latest news that Gwynne might be resigning from his seat?
They are not officially saying anything, but they, it's not really any secret that Andy Burnham and Andrew Gwynne are friends, but Andy Burnham's not saying anything, and I think it's fair to say that the people around him would say that this is a big decision for Andrew Gwynne. Yeah. It's like a big moment in his life. So Andy Burnham, for now, is not saying anything. We're not expecting to hear anything from him. And people around Andy Burnham kind of insist that they don't really know what's happening. But you can take that maybe with a pinch of salt.
Yeah. And what about his backers among the PLP? What are the Labour MPs who would like to see a leadership election in which Andy Burnham runs saying about the potential for him to do this?
It's actually more they ask questions rather than say things. I mean, people have made it clear for so long, if they like Andy Burnham, that they think he needs to be back in Parliament and it would be madness to block him and so on. But actually, I think what everyone is doing is they're saying, do you think they could block him? Because, as we'll probably come on to, there are so many hurdles for Andy Burnham to clear, because to become the Labour candidate in a by-election and then to win that by-election, you need basically the Labour leadership and the NEC to support it. And you actually need, according to the Labour rule book, you need express permission from Labour's NEC if you're a mayor and you want to stand to return to Parliament. And so I'm hearing from some people that Labour has concerns about how much contesting a new mayoral contest in Manchester would cost, which could be...
There's always a cost argument about elections these days. I think a third of councils aren't even going to go ahead with their elections in May because of cost constraints.
So there are huge cost concerns.
Sorry state. Convenient cost concerns.
Which could be a reason. But also, I mean, Ethan Croft, our political correspondent, did some really good reporting on this before Christmas. Yeah. Because everyone's been talking for ages about how the NEC could maybe block Andy Burnham. We've spoken to lots of members of the NEC, and they have no shortage of other reasons for blocking him, basically. They don't put it in those terms, but they say, well, it's very important that we have a gender balance among Labour MPs in Parliament. And at the moment, there are slightly more men than women. So it wouldn't be an official all women shortlist or anything like that. That's a bit more specific and not really what would be going on. But you could have a de facto all women shortlist by just only picking women.
Which they do and they can do.
Yeah. And so it could be a gender thing. And this wouldn't be the case with Andrew Gwynne's seat, but there's always an argument around whether, you know, basically the NEC would want a local candidate in a by-election. If you stop thinking about Andy Burnham for a second, we've both covered so many by-elections, and it doesn't often go well if the candidate isn't really, really local. Even if you used to be the MP for a seat 2 seats away, the locals often really don't like it. It's sort of a rule of politics that you just need a nice local council leader or doctor or teacher who doesn't have a complicated history to be a by-election candidate. So this wouldn't necessarily apply with Andrew Gwynne's seat, but I think the NEC are also saying that, you know, Andy Burnham would need to be really local for them to be okay. Yeah, so there's so many things, and there are others that I can barely remember, just so many reasons that NEC members are coming up with.
I'm going to ask you more questions about the NEC. I'm sure you're delighted to hear. But this is basically Labour's sort of rule-making body, right? Mm-hmm. And they decide how these kind of things work. What is the makeup of the NEC at the moment? Is it dominated by Starmer loyalists? We've had a few changes in union leaders recently. Does that give Burnham more of an advantage than he might have had before?
Overall, yes, the NEC it was kind of stitched up for the leadership for quite a long time. That has changed a little bit with some of these union elections. Yeah. But the actual issue here is that it wouldn't be the NEC overall that would be selecting a by-election candidate. It's a subcommittee of the NEC, and the NEC picks the subcommittee. So it's not, I mean, I think the subcommittee is 3 or 4 people. Okay. So actually, it's, you know, you could just pick the 3 or 4 Starmer loyalists who are prepared to. So
the ruling body is in charge of choosing the subcommittee.
Yeah.
And because the ruling body is still weighted towards Starmer loyalists, they could, in theory, pick a subcommittee that would be made up of people who wouldn't be inclined to approve Burnham's request to stand down as Greater Manchester Mayor.
Yes, they could. But I think that, I mean, there are lots of people who feel very loyal to Keir Starmer and the party, who don't necessarily want to see a leadership contest. But rather than just thinking of it in terms of factions of sort of to the left and newer union people versus Starmer loyalists, I think when you actually speak to a lot of NEC members, they're quite independent-minded and don't want to be seen to be prejudging this.
Yeah.
And so, you know, even though I've just told you all the things they say privately about hypothetically why they could block Andy Burnham, I think that they've, you know, in the past few weeks and months, they've sort of talked about wanting to see the exact circumstances. And I think it's just, it really depends on who you speak to, talking about the psychology of members of the NEC. Would you really want to risk going up against Andy Burnham and trying to thwart him when he could be the next Labour leader? You know, it's actually quite a big thing. And it all depends, I think, on some of the posturing and politics around it, where another Andy Burnham ally was saying to me, if Andy Burnham went on TV and said, I want to be the MP for this seat and here are my reasons, would Keir Starmer and Morgan McSweeney and their henchmen and women on the NEC really feel like they have the political power to stop him? You know, would it just look too much like a stitch up, or would that be fine? I mean, everyone sort of talks as though it's sort of inevitable that Andy Burnham gets blocked. And in theory, yes, but also look at the way the deputy leadership contest just went. You know, it's not like Morgan McSweeney has all of this stitched up. You know, he's got them all in the palm of his hand. You know, they didn't want Lucy Powell to become deputy leader, and she did. Yeah. So I think...
And she was backed by Andy Burnham. They're close.
Yeah, although she's sort of taken a different line since becoming deputy leader, because I think she makes the case that it would be just irresponsible to be deputy leader and to be getting involved in shenanigans. Yeah. So she's been pretty loyal to Keir Starmer and just calling for people to row in behind him. But yeah, it just means everyone is talking about this. Even NEC members are saying, what do you think is going to happen? Even though they're the people who maybe will have the deciding vote in it.
Yeah, because it would look, I think, a bit eccentric if they did block him, if he went out publicly and said, this is what I intend to do. Because he does have positive ratings in the country, for one thing. You know, he's quite popular, particularly if you look at voters in Manchester. He's very popular there.
Yeah, but then this is one of the other hurdles, because local Labour members then get to vote on the shortlist that the NEC gives them. And so I guess even though you would think it would be likely that Andy Burnham would win in a vote of CLPs, it would depend on the exact CLP. People in the Labour Party will know that every local Labour Party has very much its own flavour. and you know, and it's hard, you know, they don't, it's not necessarily reflective of the National Party, and there's often so much local politics where people want a local person to have the role, you know, not just as in from the area, but who has, you know, been a local council leader or something. So there's the really, really local politics of that. And then there's the thing that we haven't talked about yet, which is just, even if Andy Burnham became the Labour candidate in a by-election, would he even win? Yeah,
well, that's what I wanted to talk about next, because let's look at Gorton and Denton as a seat. It's one of the poorer parts of East Manchester. Labour won a 13,400 odd majority there in 2024, but Reform came in second. And actually, our data guru, Ben Walker's Britain Predicts model, suggests the seat would be a Reform gain in ordinary circumstances. And that's even factoring in tactical voting from people who want to keep Reform out. But he thinks, or his model thinks that Andy Burnham specifically as a candidate might change that result. So he might get a boost because 2 to 3 percentage points of Reform 2024 voters dislike Labour, but they like Andy Burnham. And so that could change the result. There could be a candidate effect and deliver Burnham the seat. But there's no doubt it would be a really tight contest. It will be so high profile. It would be one of those by-election circuses where, you know, you go up there and every person that you meet on the street is just another journalist. And Reform would presumably really relish the circus and would throw everything at it. So it's not a guarantee that he would even win the seat.
Yeah, it's absolutely not. And the other unknown that I even forgot to mention in my piece, but that someone messaged me, is in those circumstances, would Andy Burnham want to stand? Yeah. You know, that someone who's quite sensible and senior messaged me saying that I think he'll bottle it. That's a reform target that would be so difficult.
I mean, it's a risk, but it could also be a big opportunity, because if he did win and beat Reform there, then he's the guy who can beat Reform when Reform have been on the up and have all this momentum behind them. And that's another argument to Labour members, Labour MPs, when you come to a Labour leadership contest, if he's there to run in one. That is quite hard to argue against, I think.
Yeah, and then there are just a few other things around that. It's so interesting. It feels like this is the moment where everyone in the Labour Party, even though they're all players, they kind of become spectators and everyone's speculating over what could happen. I think, so I was sitting with a minister when this news broke, and they immediately said, Wes will want to move quickly,
Right. So it has implications for all the other candidates as well.
Actually, I mean, Andrew Gwynne, at time of recording, hasn't even resigned. This could be total all pie in the sky thinking. There might never be a by-election at the time of recording. We just don't know. But if there were, there would be... How long is the by-election campaign? 8 weeks, 10 weeks? It kind of depends, but there would be a chunk of time where in theory, Wes Streeting or another leadership hopeful could actually trigger a challenge before Andy Burnham gets to Parliament. And so people were saying, this will change the timings, and I have to say it just was feeling quite frenetic before I came over here that, I don't know what Wes Streeting is thinking around this, but just definitely a minister in Keir Starmer's government was very much saying, this is going to really change things. It's going to really speed up.
Wow.
And I mean, that could just be Westminster getting a bit excited. And then I think just the other thing that we haven't mentioned is the oddness of any sort of by-election campaign that would ensue when Andy Burnham so clearly has his eye on the leadership and sort of wants to challenge Keir Starmer. I can't actually really imagine how that would go, where we all know what he's doing it for. He's sort of set out his vision for the country with our editor Tom McTague, but I think that would be really funny. I'm finding it really, really hard to picture it, and actually I think probably that you would need to be quite flight of foot to pull that off politically, I think so. And there is the thing of abandoning the mayoralty as well, which is a big deal, because that's basically his USP, isn't it? I'm the guy who stands up for the North, or at least for Greater Manchester. I'm different from those guys down there. I left Westminster to try and do things differently. Here's the record that I can boast about in my city, and to sort of abandon all that for the grubbiness, because they always are grubby, of a leadership election, might take some of the sheen off him, even just during that process. And that's why people around Andy Burnham always say that what they need is Labour MPs to be really, really clear that they want Andy Burnham back, that it can't look too much like it's just coming from him and his own ambition. Yeah. They want to feel like he's being pulled back by Labour MPs, and we're already seeing that a little bit. Some trade union leaders from the Fire Brigades Union, for example, which is pretty far to the left, are coming out and saying that Labour shouldn't block Burnham from returning. But I think he will really want a sort of feeling of momentum, and the crowds clamouring for him to come back. Back by popular demand, basically. Exactly, yeah. I have the wording from the Fire Brigades Union General Secretary, if you're interested. I am interested, always. Just because it speaks to everything we're talking about. He's put out this preemptive statement on all these things that we've been talking about, even though there's still no by-election. Saying it would be a democratic outrage if Andy Burnham was blocked from seeking selection as Labour's by-election candidate. In the event that a by-election takes place as an affiliated union, we won't stand by and allow senior Labour politicians like Andy to be carved out of this process. We'll fiercely resist any attempts to stitch up the selection. And there's a bit more, but they're already preemptively being pretty tough. They will have a seat in the on the NEC. On the NEC. Yeah. And, I just think this could get quite messy quite quickly. That's interesting. And it is interesting what you said about them wanting sort of MPs to be more full-throated about don't block him from the process, but also we'd like him back in Parliament. He would have to secure the backing of 80 Labour MPs to challenge Starmer, even if he did make it back into the House of Commons. Does he stand a good chance of securing that support? It's an interesting one. I mean, I think yes, but it sort of depends on sort of if you're assuming that the whole of the soft left will rally behind him, because while Wes Streeting has been quite visibly on manoeuvres, I think that the soft left has felt a little bit caught on the hop, and they all tell me that they speak all the time and people underestimate how close they are, and they'll definitely have a candidate to oppose Wes Streeting. And we've spoken about that before, and, you know, how Angela Rayner would stand to stop him or whatever. But I think in practice, I find that all these people say different things. And, you know, I think some people have gone a little bit off Angela Rayner, for example. You know, there's more talk of needing a woman from the soft left to stand. Some people who like Andy but say that they think he's played his hand wrong, he's been a bit disloyal. And so I think you would sort of assume that the Tribune group in Parliament, which now has over 100 MPs in it, that this sort of big caucus of the soft left, which has rebuilt and been organising, would get in behind him. There's mainstream,
which is the soft left, this newer soft left Labour faction,
and they're really seen as like the Burnham vehicle. So you kind of assume that.
I mean, I've heard from mainstream that they've been considering new social media strategies for candidates in future elections, including a plan for Andy Burnham to do 10-minute YouTube videos, apparently, YouTube explainer videos, as part of his campaign were he to run as a by-election candidate. So this thinking is going on. Yeah,
and mainstream is I mean, sometimes people dispute this, but there's a reason that we describe it as the Andy Burnham backed mainstream group.
Yes.
Every time we mention it.
Even though that's not how they would describe themselves.
So there's a sort of assumption that whole middle bit of the party would row in behind Andy Burnham if he made it back into Parliament. And all the senior figures, Lucy Powell, Ed Miliband, Lisa Nandy, Louise Haig, Angela Rayner, you would assume that they would all get behind him. And even potentially talented opportunists from other parts of the party. You know, I've written before, Andy Burnham really rates Shabana Mahmood and knows her quite well. She's to his right. And everyone would kind of assume that she would either stand herself or maybe row in behind someone like Wes Streeting. But who knows, if you think Andy Burnham could win, maybe someone like her would back him. So definitely, I think there's kind of assumption that he could command quite a lot of support, but it is difficult for him. People talk about how he's been out of Parliament for so long that his base isn't as
solid as
you
might
solid,
have thought.
Or he's not quite as
and he's run
touch.
before,
and he's been back in Westminster quite a lot. He's been back this week to give a speech. You sort of see him around Parliament. There are certain senior figures in the party who I gather he actually does speak to all the time.
Oh, really?
But I'm not sure if that's the same as actually being here. And that does put him at a little bit of a disadvantage.
Yeah, and just lastly, Ailbhe, because we've talked a lot about personalities, but I know a lot of our listeners would want to know how substantially he would change Labour's offer to the country. Andy Burnham was speaking recently at an IFS event, and he reiterated the quote that caused so much kerfuffle in his New Statesman interview, that Labour shouldn't be in hock to the bond markets. And it's interesting that he repeated those claims, because they were sort of framed as the thing that might, you know, undermine him as someone who doesn't understand how the economy works, you know, the fears of his leadership triggering a debt crisis and things. What do you make of him just doubling down on that?
It was interesting because I had heard that he was going to clarify his remarks on the bond markets and so on. But I think we all thought that would involve sort of rowing them back. Whereas he repeated it, Britain, not Labour, in hock to the bond markets, because I gather he was trying to be quite careful not to be critical of Keir Starmer or Rachel Reeves or the Labour Party. He didn't name them or anything, but so he was speaking more broadly about the political system. And but he basically just owned that phrase and used it as a way of talking about his wider economic vision, this business-friendly socialism that he has Manchesterism, and sort of just getting out of what he calls, you know, the growth doom loop, which is an analysis shared by everyone in the Labour Party and kind of across politics that we desperately need economic growth in the UK to get out of all of our problems. But yeah, this business-friendly socialism he outlined in more detail.